There was once a kingdom in which some of the people wanted to learn the sport of quickball. And one day a stranger arrived who knew the game and who offered to teach the interested. But after he clearly explained the simple rules and moves, he discovered that they were immediately adding thereto, and turning it into a hardly recognizable, impossibly complicated mess. But don't cry for them, Venezuela, unless they crucified Caracas before a replacement kicker was signed. In his early 20s, one man began building a dollhouse, and by the time he was 30, it had expanded greatly in scope. And in his 40s, the project had become a major part of his life. But by 50, thank God, he began to submit to the natural aging process and had less and less interest in completing the task. If he can just hold out for a few more years, he'll be dead by God and won't have to concern himself with it anymore. Ah, the end at the tide of the lintel. There was once a king who had 3 sons, and the first one said, "My body is my best friend." The second declared, "My mind is my primary ally." And the third son gave no attention to such matters. And his grace, being an ex-big-time roller, was fairly pleased to get 30 cents back on the dollar. One way you can distinguish the awareness of one more aware from those of mere normal awareness is by the fact that people of the normal variety, regardless of what they say, have no taste for things original. Oh, some of them display otherwise in the non-neural, simpler hormonal areas, such generally going under the heading of perversions. Yet another way, whilst we're in the neighborhood, that you can identify residents of expanded consciousness in the building from the everyday tenants, is that the latter receive their most pleasing shocks from titillating stories from things occurring in the lower stories. The glaring prerequisite for more enlightened humor would obviously be that doesn't make you, well, laugh in any way in particular. According to one legend, at one time men were on the verge of overthrowing the gods, who retaliated on the divide and conquer basis, not regarding the race of man, but each individual. There was once a mystical castle in a faraway mythical land, which would periodically open its doors for all who cared to visit. It never accomplished much, but they did it anyway. "Close the window," said one man. "It's cold in here." And the ear, nose, and throat specialist replied something to the effect of how patients should do some things for themselves. The publicly perceived notion of the warrioristic ritual of physical harikari is a crude derivative of a mystic's form of self-health cure. Being entertaining above the physical instinctive level is a tricky task indeed. But what's even more ticklish is people realizing when they've been so entertained. And to himself, one man said, "Is it any wonder?" Thus concludes another episode in the exciting series, That. After poking around and getting pretty clever, this one guy tried to send Life a telegram, collect. Ha! But Life, being no street corner chump, before it would pay, demanded to know who it was from. Ha! One man sometimes ran on pork chop time, and other times on salad time, and others on caffeine and alcohol time. The clocks of half the world's population are set by the dinner table. One man sometimes ran on happy time, and sometimes on angry time, and others on vague, low-level hum time. The clocks of the other half of the world's population are similarly set. In one mythical kingdom, we're told tales of extraordinarily equipped knights who rode not guided by the light of the sun, nor by the shadows of the moon, and who only consumed those stuffs known to be of undivided nourishment. Many who glimpsed the outskirts of Istanbul and found traces of the Grail have tried to compare the extended state of intelligence to man's normal one, all to no satisfactory avail, which is actually no real loss, since even if it could be done, no one of routine intelligence could hear or understand it. Now a fable. The creatures of one little planet, once in the grips of intoxication or something, cried out en masse to the heavens, "We're tired of being soothed and placated." Of course, they quickly recovered and got over that. Sometimes, as the villagers would leave the fields at the end of the day, some would look up at the mythical castle on the hill and think that they wish they were there. But soon they'd all be home with food, sex, and rest awaiting, and they'd forget all about it till the next time they thought about it. Those living in penthouses, uncomfortable with their position, are given to glancing with envy at the people down below. The real reason that the ordinary are not permitted to develop a time machine is that the simple would then actually try to use it. The responsibility of those with greater sight is quite simple: to see further ahead. And of course not to run off at the mouth about it. The mythical quest starts off seeming quite extraordinary and off the usual paths, but it remains such only to those who never travel far. A man wrote to the great mythical king, "Sire, is the secret unknown because of its extreme complexity, or for some other reason?" And a viewer writes, "Okay then, if man has a dual nature of instinct and the intellect, and instinct can't really run things all by itself, and the intellect can't completely overcome the power of instinct, then who the hell is going to control who? Huh? What? Huh? Who?" Once the ruler of one kingdom went into the credit card business, he began issuing public service announcements encouraging the populace to keep all of their billing payments current for the sake of their own credit standing. Those who see any action taking place within a closed system as being condemnably self-serving lack any comprehension of how an apparently finite food chain nourishes itself. In one land, the people were tested by being asked where their last thought came from and where their next one is headed. But those who passed that test were then asked where their last thought was headed and their next one is coming from. Where's Nipper when you need him? If you call That's an old Sarnoff joke, and not referring to vodka. If you call pigs to dinner and don't serve slop, they'll complain. And if you invite men to a mental feast and don't dish up what they were expecting, they'll often get downright indignant and storm off to join the pigs. Query: why don't mystical restaurants provide doggy bags for their customers? Because there is nothing ever left over to take with them. The private slogan of one nightly order was, "When you care enough to ride alone." At the ordinary level, the simple do not pay as much attention to the mind as do the more sophisticated, who in turn pay too much attention. And upon becoming privy to this fact, a young boy said to his father, "Papa, if this be so, do you realize its significance to the thinking of the mystically inclined?" And his pater replied, "Well, no." From the mouths of the elderly, even sometimes by accident, slips the truth. For all the good it does them. There is a lesser-known version of the local creation story which says that when the first man first made the gods mad and a little crazy, as punishment they made him put on a Captain Sarcasm costume, which they intended to impose as a temporary penalty, but got distracted with other matters and forgot to remove. Tough luck. The first time on earth was heard the question, is there some method to this madness, was when, well, I'll bet you can guess when. Midway through construction, one man stopped long enough to take a comprehensive survey of how things had gone thus far. And after some mulling over what he observed, he announced that neither the weather nor the food served the workers played any part in how things presently stood. Caution out there. A man with no explanations to offer can run the risk of being mistaken for a mystic. Another field report from the battle zone. If you do not clearly and plainly attack, the simple have no idea what you're doing. We don't have to go storming off to join the pigs. In one city, the most common problem in residential buildings was people upstairs playing their radios too much. Some more of its anatomy. A man with 2 ears will never hear anything worth hearing. A certain knight returned to his original homeland from the great quest and discovered the local water polluted. May I note to you that the water was just as it had always been. It was he who just now noticed its condition. One legend has it that all mystical tales pass through 2 sets of hands. First, those of the tale's actual author, then through a second set whose job it is to mangle and rearrange the story's original intention, and only then is it fit to be released publicly. Now do you begin to understand why a knight's library generally consists of little more than a cracked mirror? A man ran into the village shouting, "Beware, beware, there are alien creatures here among you." But them all being from around there and all, how could they tell? Before anyone cries out that this doesn't make any sense, be forewarned that doing so is a bald admission that you are eternally from around here. Come to think on it, what might be the supreme insult to a mystic? Asking him, "Are you from around here?" Every time this one man would walk past his mine's construction site, it'd whistle at him and make suggestive remarks. "How come, huh? You can't learn to reverse a situation, huh?" Heads up, sad but so. Even if it were possible, a secret revealed is a secret ruined. Okay, at least reduced. And I leave it to you to define sad. The trickster conductor on one scheduled mystical express told the passengers that the easiest way to take the journey was to passively, almost blankly, stare out the window at the scenery rushing by until it becomes an endless blur. No traveler with any real mystical potential has to ever be thrown from the train. He'll do it himself. Only those operating at the natural level of consciousness take consciousness for granted. There was once a race of creatures who started out purple, but also acquired green, which for some reason seemed to disturb them. So they began referring to it as orange and appeared to feel better about it. The local law of the land. A thing misnamed is a thing disarmed. Is it not understandable why so many of the mystically inclined volunteer for overseas duty and pray that they don't get to feeling any better about it? As punishment in advance, for transgressions they would probably commit in the future, life condemned this one race of creatures to either having to listen to an endless stream of myths and fables, or else to a continuing string of mathematical formulas. Ow! One man told his son, "My nerves are on edge," and the lad replied, "From years of neglect, quite probably." Health news: ruin is not curable. Best undertake treatment now while you're possibly still alive. Within one nightly order, no funeral service or ritual was ever observed, for one simple reason. The mystical dreams of butchers always drip with blood. So pondered one chap. If the universe is a balanced and equitable place, then the gods must also have myths about men. But great Zeus, what could they be? For his lesson one day, the head of a mystical school so spoke to the students: "If you search for the secret by looking up here at me, or by looking at the world out there, you err." He then took questions and was asked, "What about looking into your own thinking?" And he asked if there were any more questions. The real basis and history of mysticism, the effort to evolve one's own mental activity, is quite simple. So simple, in fact, that most tend to never give it any notice. Thus it has come to the entangled mess you see today. By the by, just a reminder that many of the stories reported here, which begin with such words as "there was once a place," etc., refer not actually to some past time, but to some future one. Above the instinctive physical level, the desire to get well is proof that you're sick. Once upon a time was a man who was from another world. But since he was also from this one, very few people ever noticed. Notice, everyone is potentially also from another world. While it can take man's normal intellect many years, even thousands, to construct a given structure, it can be disassembled by a more alert one in mere seconds. This is not to say that such a feat is of any value to ordinary minds. There's one thing you can definitely say about a mystic. Life in the big city. When it thunders, cows still believe in God. No matter what it is that individual passengers may believe that they see out the train window, they can still be easily kept in the dark as to exactly where they are by simply always being told that they are anywhere but where they actually are. The simple are forever offended by being fairly described, while a man holding a secret ticket doesn't care one way or the other. On a roadbed of greater dimensions, what is said about you by others is of no significance compared to your own act of self-reference of any sort. On the day that the king was to give him his personal charge, and him began the mystical quest, one night, as a sacred memorial gesture, offered up to the sword of his liege his tongue. The less one's life satisfactorily led, the more one's wont to engage in self-reference. TIBT. Thus it be that all biographies of mystics must be frauds. Praise be to Odin and Athea. Announcement. Hear ye earthlings, the final word regarding the matter of the truth. Those with 2 mouths can't speak it. End of transmission. Now back to it. I would like to offer up yet another verbal description and approach to the matter of man's undeniable dual nature. And notice how, in this regard, we have ordinary humans taking this matter to be of seriousness ranging from the degree of terminally so, such as the fundamentalist, the simplistically religious, who believe that within man is a life and death struggle between good and evil. From that level, or from that end of a spectrum, to a less secular one, such as from a psychological view, that there is a struggle of some importance, that man will never be, any individual man will never be at ease with himself, will never be psychologically sound until the conflict between man's unconscious drives and desires and motivations are in some way brought into line or brought under the control, at least the conflict between that and his conscious mind, as they call it, is in some way brought into a better, more agreeable alignment. And sort of from a political view, the belief that socially man that the civilized desire within man must in some way be brought to the forefront as opposed to the remaining feral inclinations inherent in man. And reminding you that this is not taking any position, the description I'm giving, and the reason I continue to recount this is the notion of there being a duality in man is as old as the publicly known history of man. But it is always taken as being a conflict of some kind in which there is, according to which school, according to who it is speaking, that this conflict is without any doubt based upon there being a deserved victor. That it is not an unweighted observation. You do not find, for instance, anyone at the end of my imaginary spectrum that is religious in nature, who is wired up to be religious, and to see this obviously felt dual nature of each person, that they see it as a matter of there being a battle between good and evil. You will find no one that has such a view that does not have a vested interest, does not have a chosen, selected winner. You do not find someone proclaiming that man is a battlefield between good and evil, and you go, well, whose side are you on? And they go, well, I don't care. It's irrelevant to me. It's simply, it does not work that way. Again, the reason I'm laying on I know I've repeated this several times of late, and I'm doing it again right now. Any time that is normally brought up to fairly sophisticated and educated people, if they were listening, and you start mentioning anything about a duality of man, they would normally expect that if you were either going to speak in religious terms, such as between good and evil, or that you were about to give some essay in psychobabble about man's unconscious drives and his subconscious, his conscious drives, or that you're about to engage in some political screed, hectoring people about how we should be more liberal, more progressive in our thinking, and we should be actively engaged in the promotion of social justice against that of whatever the opposing side would be. Once you accept, as is already built into the dual nature of man, that it is not by any stretch of the ordinary mind's imagination or perception, it is in no wise an objective, nor should it be an objective, impartial struggle between any two forces in which the observer, that is man, has no interest. The ordinary mind never conceives of it that way. That as soon as you say, if you announce, well, the speech is going to be, I'm going to make some comments having to do with the dual nature of man, the duality inherent in man, then any person with enough interest that would sit there after that and go, okay, they expect, without any analyzation, you do not even have to prime yourself for it, contraire, You know, without any thought given, you know that the speech is about to be an attack on somebody. That's the reason I keep laying on this, because that is part of the weighted process of the operations, the electromechanical operations of ordinary consciousness, taking a multitude of things to be fait accomplis, to be operational givens, when they are not. Oh, they are, but what's missing is the fait accompli is thought itself. If you say, all right, I'm going to speak about the dual nature of man, you go, okay, and you go, I say, wait a minute. But now, wait, first off, to make it work most efficiently, and if you're going to try to follow what I'm saying, is think about this. What I'm about to point out, I might use different terms, or I might point out that my terms fit into ordinarily conceived, or ordinarily used terms, but I want you to understand to start with that what we're going to try and track is in no wise biased to one position or the other. I guess charitably somebody might go, huh? But see, if you miss that, you already have the continuing, let us say, I'll call it a flaw. You understand that's conditional. You have this certain quirk. You have this certain irreversible eccentricity into human thought that everything that's going is limping. Everything that's going, you know what eccentric means originally. The real is it's off center. It's like if you had a wheel and it's running off center, but it's this weighted part that keeps it going. It's human thought. That if you try and present somebody, if you say, I'm going to describe something that everyone's familiar with, and you go, okay, but I'm going to describe it in a way that you've never heard it, because I'm going to describe in a way that has no bias built into it. And if you try and do it, does everybody know, I guess it would be sort of a form, at least neurally, of the Doppler effect. Or how about those of you that remember the old great days of, and recorded music, of vinyl? Did you ever buy a record that the hole was punched slightly off center? And it plays and goes, that's the way, but see, you're used to it. The ordinary workings of the mind is used to this. And if you come along and you try and sing the song, whatever song it is, and you just go, all right, I know how that song goes. Let me show you how it goes without the eccentricity, without the off-centeredness built in. And you sing it, people go, what the hell is that? You've ruined my song. Or else they think, well, you don't know the song. You go, oh yeah, I'm singing the same song you've been singing. Whatever it is, some political song, some Life's Up on My Pecker song, some... it can be some religious song. It could be any kind of song, but you're used to hearing it in the mind. You always hear it as na 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 na. Well, you got it. Then if you say, all right, I know the song. No, I know it. And they go, well, really? And you go, so listen to this. I'm going to give you a version of it. What you've been hearing is not exactly the way it was originally written. And they go, okay, let's hear it. And so you put the center back in where it belongs in the record. And now you play it without the eccentricity, without it being weighted, now it's on center, and it goes round and round, and it's not weighted. The record is now in balance, and it plays like the song was originally recorded. And of course, in all this, read live, and it records like it is, and the people, they go, what? And they recognize some of the words. They go, wait a minute, are you trying to sing my song, my favorite song? You go, yeah, that's exactly what I was doing, but I put the whole back in the center. I sang it in an objective way. I sang it the way it was originally written. And they might go, all right, do it one more time. And so you start and you go, blah, 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 blah. And you sing the song as you describe some aspect of life or man, but you describe it with a hole in the center. And they might let you go a few more words again. They go, well, I thought that. And their feeling, they wouldn't know how to analyze it, but their feeling would be that you were some sort of sham at best, and at worst, you were deranged, because you obviously know the words of the song, because you had them going there for a second. You went, all right, here it goes. My baby, my God, my religion, my blah, 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 what are you talking about? And they go, yeah, yeah. And yet something's wrong. You're not saying it right. And then if you were so foolish and if you went contraire, I am singing it not right by my definition. I'm simply singing it the way the record was originally pressed when the hole was in the center. Back when Adam and Eve was in the garden and their record player ran at the right speed. Which that is, they had no record player or record. But if I said, yeah, I know what the song is, but I'm now playing it just like it was written. I just thought you might be interested. This is the way it was originally recorded. This is the way it went. It is not weighted. Now back to the dual nature. If you consider my wrap-up of, you recall, we're trying to give you a full menu, possible menu, whatever way you want to look at it. Of the level of consciousness, and up here it is man's, or down here is his biological, is instinctive, his physical self, or realms. That's one of the dual natures, and up here, of course, comparative to that would be his psychological self, his mental self, and as some might want to throw in, the spiritual self, which I covered tonight if you weren't listening, in the story of a race that was once born purple, and along the way they also acquired green, and that seemed to make them somehow uneasy, so they started calling it orange, and apparently felt better about it. That is that. And the punchline of that news item was that things misnamed at city level, at ordinary level, are things disarmed. In case you're ever, I was going to say, in case you have to defend yourself by a dark alley, and you understand that physical attack is of no great importance, but if you're attacked, remember this, if you can misname your attacker, that is, rename it something else, you disarm him. Or looked at another way, if you can see it coming, if you realize I am mentally susceptible to all kinds of childish attacks, that is, I am inclined to dance that kind of kindergarten ballerina or tango with other minds of an equal maturity, then his defense to it is just simply rename your mind. You don't have to rename that if you begin to see your mind as something that you want to disarm, is rename it when somebody comes up to you and says, would you like to dance? All right, I'll straighten out. Somebody comes up and asks you a question. Oh, tell me about you. They want to engage in something like that, and you don't want to, is misname this. That was free along the way. Consider this, having to do with the dual nature, what I was getting to in specific. From everyone's view, I gave you everything from religion to psychology to political, which about covers it, and anything else you can think of fits into it. That it is always seen that they all humans, from the most simplistic, is what I was trying to give you, from the people living out, people just on the cusp of civilization, as executed circa 1995, those at the most simplistic level that take the idea of gods quite seriously, that still take the normal conception of religion to be literally valid, then they, without any doubt, see that there is a conflict. There's a dual nature, but what I want you to keep in mind is as long as you think there's a dual nature, whether it be at a simplistic level such as between good and evil, or if it be what appeared to be comparable to this, to most people now, a psychological / sociological / political view that was not good and evil, it is just the more progressive vis-a-vis the regressive, the liberal view versus the conservative view, or the psychologically sound view that a man should be run as far as possible, should be motivated by his personally chosen decisions, by his conscious mind as opposed to subconscious traumas, etc. That as long as you think there's a duality to man, which everyone does, and I'm getting to why, but as long as you do, just keep in mind along the way, you always see the duality, it's one and the same thing, that the duality equals conflict. It is not an impartial duality. It is not twin sisters who are both comely. It is not twin brothers who are both brave. It's all, and it's not two brothers in the used car business and they're both honest. I'll swallow the other examples I could think of. The duality of man, that sensation, which is quite real and is quite valid, but the sensation always carries with it, they're inseparable, the like sensation that they are in conflict. There is no such normal feeling, sensation, belief, but it's based upon physical sensation. There is no sensation in the ordinary mind of any ordinary man that the duality exists sans conflict. The conflict is part of the duality, no matter what it's thought of to be, between good and evil, between progressive political influences and regressive ones, or open market political or economic models as opposed to governmental planned models. Whatever it is, there is a conflict. Now, there has been much written, not certainly in the sense I'm using it, but in economics, politics, the arts, religion, the social milieu, as far back as Western recorded history and Eastern. As far back as the Greeks and the Sumerians have been scratching on pots and pans of struggle inherent in the duality of man. That is simply a part of man's nature. And as I started to say, there has been, past that point, there has been a continuing series, cornucopia of essays attempting to explain the nature of this duality. But they're all based upon one common assumption, that the duality is something other than native to man, that is something other than natural. I'm being charitable and understating it, because I know that there are people nowadays, I may be shaving it unnecessarily thin, but there are people nowadays who would insist, if they understood what I just said, that the conflict is not actually a win-lose game, that it is, such as in the psychological arena, that it is not simply the win-lose game that all of man's unconscious drives and desires must be brought completely under control by his conscious mind. If I did it that way, they'd go, oh, now come, sir, be a bit more sophisticated than that. But still, they still cannot escape, no matter how they try and verbally exempt themselves from very crude, binary, dichotomous situations. Still, anytime you conceive of there being a conflict of some sort, of any sort, inherent, no matter what your view is, or even if you had no view, if you heard about a battle going on now between two tribes in some area of the world that you'd never heard of, and that they're going at it tooth and hammer and nail and tongue, and you heard they're killing one another and having riots, and you'd never even heard of the people, you've got no genetic connection to them as far as you know. No, but you're just simply aware that it's the X people fighting the Y people here, that one time they lived here on the island in peace and harmony, now they're killing one another. You know that somebody is supposed to win, that somebody's going to win, even if you have no interest in who. What I'm trying to say, that does not really meet an individual description of an objective view, but it can be simply a matter in which you are not wired to have any native interest. But you still know that all conflict is headed towards some victor, toward a resolution wherein one side overcomes the other. There have been continuing attempts, philosophers, religious apologists, sociologists, psychologists, social commentators, continuing to try and come up with how did man fall into this era of believing that there is some dual nature. And whoever the writer is in question, he will pick out examples in which he has no particular interest, assuming that he even meets the qualification as being a city-level member of the intelligentsia. He will pick out an example in which he has no particular interest himself, and then it's easier to theoretically assail one side over the other, such as a man who is not religious today, a humanist, just someone that's not religious. It is easy for him to pick out religion. Of course, he's not going to be completely devoid of any connection to it, or he wouldn't be aware of it. He wouldn't use it. But within a closed system, Always, you know that. Anytime it rains, you're going to get splashed one way or the other. But he could pick out religion and say, here's an example of an absolute. He might pick that as the best example. Here is at least a primary example of the futility, the jejune nature of this duality of man, because here it is, we have people, and he could say, here it is, the beginning of the 21st century, and we have people right now, supposedly civilized, killing one another still in the name of their God and religion, and so he can dismiss that as there is a prime example of the sorts of things we must overcome. And implicit, if not directly highlighted in his comment, is the fact that this can be in some way overcome. This can be outbred. This is an ill, this is a flaw in man which can be cured. Now, there are all kinds of catchphrases that are taken as being quite deep in wisdom, or being reflections of quite deep wisdom of man created this problem, man can solve this problem. I mean, it's used in everything from religion nowadays to the field of ecology. And it seems to be at the ordinary level, at that kind of binary level of perception, it seems to be a quite defensible position to say, well, wait a minute. Man made up. I'm taking the position of this non-religious person that using religion as an excellent example of the futile, in fact, the dangerous, the wasteful nature of the dual aspect of man in certain areas when gone untreated. And he would say, all right, look at religion. Here it is, men fighting over the idea of gods, and also implicit in this man's comment, of course, is that the whole idea is silly. There's no gods, there's no forces out there. It's men, and in some way, long ago, in simpler times, they got deluded, and we still have people here on the face of the earth fighting over the idea of gods. My God wants me to do this, and your God's the wrong one, and you guys are not following the right rituals, and therefore we're fighting. So they're saying, the comment, the observation being, that here is a problem based upon a duality of man in one area. But in this one area, it is observably detrimental, but it is absolutely treatable, curable, because men invented this problem. Men invented it, and therefore they can fix it. They still cannot come up. As you know, I'm not trying to prove a point. I'm just wanting your thinking to get up to this place. No one has ever satisfactorily out there at that level come up with an explanation of how this duality came about. All they can do is single out areas in which they have less than a full-blown wired interest, and then try and take it apart and say, well, we've got to do something about it because it's foolish, and both areas, neither side is going to win. Neither side is correct. They were just abandoning it. They still cannot explain, well, how in the hell did this happen? If it is as ridiculous, if it is as insane and detrimental to the well-being of people, we say to this humanist attacking religious conflict, religion in general, but particularly the conflict, we say to this man, we say, well, explain this to us. By your own admission, you're pointing out these are civilized people, the modern world, Western Europe, anyway, modern areas of the world, and they're fighting. Grown-up people, college educations, good suits and ties and haircuts, and they're killing one another. And you point out that, I'm using your example, you say to him, how do you explain that then? If it is so removed from the reality of humanity, if it is such an illusion, if it is some kind of perverted trompe-l'oeil, how do you explain that it is still prevalent? And usually they can do something like, well, or ask for your credentials, or why do you want to know? They simply cannot explain it. So here we go. The explanation is quite simple. And without ever seeing it, many things are not possible. Look at it this way. From every observable level, in this reality, on planet Earth, man is singular. And by almost any other observation by any intelligent person, they can take my words, I can use their terms, but if they were listening, they understand that which makes man singular is above that lower level. That no other creature has a dual nature. None. There's nothing resembling a dual nature to any other creature on this planet. They never find orangutans in the jungle plagued by uncertainty. They do not find hippos suffering over low self-esteem. You do not find wolves biting their claw nails, or you do not find them abusing their children. You do not find them symbols. No one is saying so, but there's nothing in any creature but in any way displays a duality. Conflict, which, as I point out, the existence of the duality is itself the conflict. You cannot have this duality without there being an apparent conflict. So you cannot see any internal conflict in any other animal, because they are living simply by the instinctive, in the instinctive realm. No uncertainty, no doubt, no ulcers, no psychological problems, because they don't have a psychological. It's that simple. Now, as to the origins of this feeling of internal conflict, under whatever guise it goes with any individual, the origins are quite simple. Once man developed the other realm, so I've already told you and you just weren't listening. As soon as he developed a second realm, and that there was a duality to him, now see, there's no way to prove this. I'm not going to fix it to offer you some sort of proof. All you got to do is, if you can see, you simply look, and there's the evidence, and the evidence being its existence. As soon as he developed another aspect, an aspect singularly sufficient to be singularly described, even though it's not separate, even though a man's brain will not operate if you stab him in the liver. If you ruin his spleen, 30 years or 12 years of good postgraduate work, just shoot. And his ability to play the violin can just. But it is still describable enough. Again, not just from my descriptions. It's there, and everyone evidences it. But it is there if you want to look beyond man. As I said, you're looking at first. There's no other creature that shows any signs of being any internal conflict. There is no conflict. The only conflict is the drive to live, to survive, the instinctive. And that's not conflict. It is a lion gets hungry and he turns around. If you're nearby, you may be dinner. And then it's solved. He has no longer a conflict. It is simply hunger, and it will be met, or he's yesterday's news. But he shows no signs of conflict. He does not go out and chase down a gazelle, and halfway through the meal, you're up there observing, and suddenly you see the tiger look like, God, she sure did look like a lot like Bambi. I feel, should I be doing this? Should I maybe take up vegetarianism? And then eat a while longer, and then, damn, I don't know. Nothing like that. It is only when you have a duality. It is only when you have a duality sufficient to observe, which I'm trying to get you to see without it being in any way my theory. Man suffers a conflict. If you are alive, if you are genetically sound enough to have an intellect, if you think and talk, you are a victim of an internal conflict. That's your sensation. No matter what you call it, it is there. How does it come about? It is not acquired by man. It is not brought about by social conditions. It is not brought about by childhood traumas. It is not brought about by external evil forces with hooves and claws and tails nipping at the soul of man. It came about as soon as man developed this second nature, this second realm. Because I already told you, when I said I told you the answer and you didn't hear it in that way, if you've got two natures, if there is a duality extant in you, there's a conflict. Say that was it, see, for anybody who was listening and thinking, well, aren't you going to tell us what it is? And they keep waiting, that's it. But see, then the mind will go and say, well, no, you just said how it is. You didn't say why it is. Why it is how it is. It's there. When does a child? Well, already, but if you want any more about it, all you got to do is observe a child growing up. And until a child, as I point out, is one of the great joys of parents' life, apparently, when they holler, he talked. He looked me dead in the eye. He quit bobbing his head, and he looked at me like it. But as soon as he speaks, that's one of the first ones, because what the parent knows is, hey, he joined us. Of course, I could be crude if I had my Captain Sarcasm cape. It's like the parents go, not the little fuckers in the same shape we are. But of course you go, oh, he can speak. What it denotes is a day when it denotes outside observers, his parents, the first absolute proof, the first evidence that he is developing the second realm. He is becoming human. Because now he said a word. He pointed at you, or you looked over at him and he went, Daddy, or whatever it is, and you knew that the sound now had some relationship to something going on. It's not just gurgle, gurgle, and it is. He went, Daddy, or ball, or fling. You know how it goes. Up until that point, I know parents do not stand around in any way and look at it in this manner. But up until that point, and then it's not just a cutoff, but up until that point, a child shows no sign of any sort of conflict. Same as an animal. He cries when he's hungry, and you feed him, and he shuts up. It's not a conflict, it's a hunger. But it's after this mind starts, and he just starts developing, as parents usually say, his personality. That's when a conflict starts. They never analyze it this way. But it's once that starts, you try and then tell the child something. He gets old enough and you say, don't throw your food down. He throws the food down. It's the same old thing that people think, well, it's conflict going on between me and him. We've got to straighten him out. We've got to teach him what's what. It's not that. As soon as his two natures, as soon as his second nature developed enough to actually be operational, he or she was now in conflict. It had nothing to do with you. It had nothing to do with anything other than the fact that he now has conflict. If you have a dual nature, you have conflict. That's the reason. And still, if anybody was, well, you kept saying you're going to tell me the reason. What is it? That's it. If you've got a dual nature, you have conflict. It wasn't caused by anything. You don't have to look anywhere. The existence of this dual nature is the cause of the conflict. As I was trying to note in shorthand, without a knowledge of this, without you seeing it in you, you end up with running in circles, and off-center circles at that. You're trying to run on a track that is a parallel image of my off-center record. You're trying to run in a track, and you might as well be partially crippled. The track does not actually go in a circle. You never get back where you started. You're limping. You keep expecting one thing, and it never works. You keep expecting that there's in some way that the good part of me will overcome the bad part. Or the smart side of me will overcome the dumb part. Or the more attentive side and alert side of me will overcome that somnambulistic, half-dazed chowderhead that passes for me sometimes. Ha ha. I know it all sounds great. All known, publicly known mystical systems seem to start on that. Every observable, methodical attempt that man has made, that's been noticed publicly and recorded, to expand his consciousness, starts on that basis. It has to. Would you like to be more conscious? And you think, well, I don't know what that means. Then you're not much of a subject. In fact, you're not conscious. If you say, if somebody stands up, if Muhammad, his brother-in-law, somebody showed up and says, are you satisfied with your natural state? Of course, if it was another kind of reality and we had any real little troopers out there, they would think, is this a trick question? But no. If you listen to it, you have an answer to it. Why else would you attempt something if you were satisfied? But the great subtle, as of old used to say, and tricksters, the pickle, the gaff, the hook, if you're a carp, just looking worm. Yes, I would certainly like to be, you can fill it in, a better person, but in the sense that most people would be pursuing or entertaining any of what we're talking about here. If you say, would you like to be more understanding of life? Would you like to be more conscious? Would you like to expand your own awareness? Yes, 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 yes. Of that as it is now, that's my problem. And so I assume you've got some message of how I can overcome that. Yeah, but you're not going to like them. Oh yeah, I like them. I'm sorry I missed it. You're not going to hear it. Well, I just heard that. What do you mean I won't hear it? Well, I just told you. Well, no, I thought you was going to tell me something. I just did. See, the little byplay when I went, you won't like it. You know, like I did that accidentally. I went, no, not like it. You won't hear it. And the person goes, well, no, I can hear it. Well, what do you mean, won't like it? And then no, I'll get to you. I heard you say that. You don't remember the man tonight that wrote The Mystical King and said, Sire, is the reason that the ordinary mind cannot hear the secret is because it is so astoundingly complex, or for some other reason?